Hey guys, how's it going, Kripparrian? So now we've seen all the cards that the Grand Tournament has to offer. A few really big questions are still out there in terms of like the large mechanics, like will the inspired deck archetype actually work? Yeah, I don't know. Still, it's pretty hard to understand if that will actually be competitive, but it does seem like with all the cards now that there are enough cards to slow down the game a little bit to allow for some type of decks, some slower, some mid-rangey decks, to probably be quite competitive in the meta. So with that, we know maybe a few more cards are playable, maybe a few slower cards, maybe some legendary cards are a little bit more playable than in the past, and we can maybe have a pretty good understanding about what is really good and what is really, or in this case, really horrifyingly bad. Before I give you guys my opinion, I want to show you guys the results of a pretty big poll that was run by someone on Reddit. They made a poll asking users to rate every single card from 1 to 10, and at the end it was summarized after 1,000 people had submitted what they had thought about the cards. It ranked the top 10 and the bottom 10 cards, and I wanted to go over that, give you guys kind of like the public impression about what's going on, my feedback on that, and then I'll get into the cards, and a lot of stuff will be similar to what I think will actually be like the game changers, and then, of course, the bad ones, the really irrelevant cards. So the top 10 cards as ranked by the polls on Reddit. Number 1, Varian Wrynn, Warrior Legendary. I have to say this card is pretty good, even though clearly from the list, I think the perception of people who play Hearthstone is often not appropriately skewed towards legendaries being good. In fact, in the history of Hearthstone, legendaries have actually been particularly awful. Yes, there's like 1 or 2 good legendaries at any given time, but when you look at like the total number of legendaries that people are excited about when an expansion comes out, and then like 1 month later, how many of those legendaries are actually being played, it's extremely lopsided. So people are often way too optimistic about legendaries, so I feel most of those don't really belong on that list. A lot of them don't actually change the game in the big way because they're just like pretty powerful. You might like use that instead of, you know, Ragnaros or something. But then in terms of the power level of the deck, using one of those legendaries instead of like Ragnaros, you know, it won't actually make much of a difference. So, you know, Totem Golem's number 2. Yes, it probably deserves to be there. But like the Mist Caller at number 3, I don't know. That seems a little optimistic. I mean, if the Mist Caller is number 3, then, you know, Wilford Fizzlebang should be number 4. Is basically what I'm trying to get at. I talked about the Mist Caller. It's a really powerful card, but it's really unbelievably slow because it does absolutely nothing when you play it, and when you compare it to a worse Sword of Justice effect, it's really only going to start to redeem that value after you've played like 5 more creatures after it. So how frequently can you get away with playing a card that does nothing, that's terrible stats for its mana cost, and stay in the game 5 more turns for the stats of those creatures to actually be relevant in the game? Well, if you're playing like a really slow control versus control, yeah, that's relevant. That might be pretty good. But does that actually change the game? Not really. Actually, it does nothing. Actually, like a ton of other cards have to change the game for this card to even be useful at all. And even in that environment, it doesn't really seem like completely broken. It's just like cool. It's really cool. And maybe it's pretty good, but not really like broken. So, you know, not really too good there. That's why we see like a lot of legendaries on the list. People are just like, wow, this legendary is the best thing ever. Well, legendaries cost a lot of mana, and the legendaries already in the game are basically, whoa, the best thing ever already. So that's kind of why the perception is a little bit off. Out of the list, another card that kind of strikes me as a little bit weird that it's so high is the Tuskar Totemic. I think Tuskar Totemic is a pretty good card. You know, you play it on turn 3, and you most likely will get like a pretty bad totem. You know, if you get a pretty bad totem, that's still kind of like a pretty decent 3-drop creature, I guess. It's just that because it has 2 health, the main creature is often going to die to their 2-drop, and most of the time, the totem you're going to get is not going to be significant at all in the game. So it's not a bad card. You know, maybe shamans will run the card, maybe, but I don't think it'll actually have a big influence on the game, as some of the other cards on the list, specifically some of the cards that I'll talk about in my top 5 list in a moment, you'll see why I think they make a bigger impact. In terms of the bad cards, this is the top 10 worst cards as reviewed by 1,000 poll submissions from 1 to 10. So, I mean, the lowest possible rank you could get is 1. So, Poison Blade is ranked as the worst card at 1.8. That kind of seems justified. It's really, really bad. You have to use your hero power a ton of times for this to even be, like, just an average rogue weapon, basically. It's unbelievably bad. Yes, it allows you as a rogue to start using Inspire mechanics, because otherwise, because you can't attack with your weapon every single turn, and often if you play weapon buffs, that will actually be really, really bad to use your weapon hero power every single turn. This card is so horrible, it doesn't actually go towards fixing that. So it seems like you will not be playing an Inspire-based rogue deck, because nothing really encourages that. Only cards that are this bad have some significance. So, you know, some of the cards on the list kind of make sense, but some don't. Like Demon Fuse. Demon Fuse is a bad card. I think it's pretty bad. But, you know, people who don't have a lot of dust, I think they're going to try making, like, super aggressive, all-in rush demon decks. And, like, I think they're going to use Demon Fuse. I think they're going to try to make it work. It's not like there's worse cards than Demon Fuse. So cards that support, like, cost-effective decks that have the option to, like, rush people down somewhat consistently, these are cards that might actually be used. So probably not, because it's a pretty bad card. But, you know, there's actually some chance people will use Demon Fuse in their decks, and, you know, people might actually have some success with those decks, and those decks might either develop a meta or counter an existing meta. So it's not, I wouldn't, like, write off this card completely, even though, yes, it is really bad. So, yeah, we'll see. Also, like Colosseum Manager, it's obviously a really bad card, but for, like, Arena, it's, like, not really that horrible. 2-5 for 3 is just, you know, pretty damn good stats, actually. So being able to get back some value maybe in the late game may actually be an advantage. You do use your hero power quite a bit in Arena, but you never really use your hero power in the early game if you draft tempo. So, I mean, this guy kind of fits that. It's an okay Arena card. People are going to play this guy a little bit in Arena. So, you know, I kind of gauge these cards on the overall strength. You know, most people just look only in Constructed, but I think a lot of the really, really bad cards, they ideally should be completely useless in Constructed and in Arena. So, yeah, we'll get to that in a moment. Another example is like Flame Lance. Flame Lance will never see Constructed play ever, 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 ever. Like, you start a fresh account with 30 cards better than Flame Lance, okay? This card is terrible. But when it comes to Arena, because you often have to get Polymorph to remove creatures that otherwise can't die to Fireball, Flame Lance is still pretty bad, but, you know, you're going to have the situation where it's Flame Lance versus, like, 2 garbage 1-drops. So, you're going to pick Flame Lance. And I think in a decent number of cases, you're not going to be that sad about it. So it has some impact on the game. It's a common card. It's not the worst thing ever. It's actually maybe around average for Mage. So that's okay. Also, I don't think Ball of Spiders is too bad for that reason. I think it's a alright Arena card. I think it might be pretty fun to play. It's not that bad. Like, a lot of these cards aren't really that bad. They might see some play in Constructed, especially for people just starting out, and, you know, they will see some reliably, you know, effective Arena play. So I don't agree with that list too well. So my list, let's get to it. Let's just run through the best cards, because this is pretty clear cut. I think the public perception is pretty good on what's the best out there. Outside of people kind of just having the favoritism for legendaries, most legendaries are not really that impactful. So the best card, I also agree, it is a Varian Wrynn. I think Varian Wrynn will be in almost every single Control Warrior list, and I think because Control Warrior was dealing with aggro well enough before, if people slow down the meta, Control Warrior can get away with running a lot more greedy cards, which would make it like extremely powerful. And this is the very first super greedy card you put in your Control Warrior deck. Control Warrior was a control defining deck in the past, so I'd imagine it'll continue to be one, and this card will be an absolute staple. So this card basically puts Control Warrior in an already powerful deck on the map again in post TGT. So this card impacts the game big time. Okay, that's my definition of a good card. And then we have Totem Golem. I think Totem Golem is almost an auto-include in every single Shaman deck, just because it's a big enough creature that you can just play it. It has synergy some of the slower decks because it's a totem. You can maybe buff it, or you can do some crazy stuff with it. And it's just insane in the early game. It stops aggressive decks because it literally kills every single other 2-drop. And it actually probably deals with some 3-drops. So if it kills a 2-drop and stays alive, and then it also kills a 3-drop, you don't even need to play anything on your third turn. So it's like saving a card and gaining the tempo, and you know, it's just so strong. You know, super powerful stats can make a big difference, even in constructed. And in Arena, this card is like batshit crazy, Okay, it might be better than Fire Elemental in terms of overall win ratios. So yeah, pretty big stuff. Number 3, I also have to agree. I think it is Darnassus Aspirant, and I saw this card played a little bit, and it improved my perception of it. I thought the card was just okay, but it's just really powerful. You play it on turn 2, and it requires your opponent to have some kind of spell removal for it. They have to deal with it, because if they don't deal with it, you get the 1 mana acceleration. And if you do like this and then into a 4-drop, often that's like better than Wild Growth, because you get the tempo aspect on 2. They have to inefficiently use a removal often on turn 3. So if they have to use like a Frostbolt on your 2-drop, they give up their turn 3 to kill your turn 2. So even in the best case, often you will be ahead. And if they don't do that, you can play a 4-drop, probably trade evenly, and then you win tempo in that way. So it just has such a big advantage in so many ways that it seems like a lot of people will really try to redefine the way they make Druid, and this card will probably be used because still most of the ways you play Druid involve a lot of mana crystals. So again, a very impactful card in the meta. And then one that's not on the public list at all, I think Competitive Spirit might, this is, I'm kind of like going out there with this one, but I have a feeling this card might be really, really strong. And this mostly has to do with my experience in the very, very early stages of Hearthstone, when I actually really played Constructed quite a bit. My favorite deck was like the Fast Paladin deck. And the Fast Paladin deck was a deck that it was good enough against like other fast decks, but it absolutely destroyed mid-range decks. Just because mid-range decks would be just slightly too slow and you would develop a growing advantage, but because of the interactions with Divine Favor and a few other cards which still exist in the game right now, you would very easily develop big boards. And even back then, it hasn't really changed to today, where you just don't have very many like really good 1-drop cards, especially 1-drop secrets, but you had to play them anyway. So this is like a really powerful secret if you have a lot of minions. It's a very easy card to get rid of. It's just like almost always good if you're playing that type of deck, and that type of deck, Aggro Pally, is being played right now. Okay, so almost no aggressive decks are getting better after TGT. They just haven't really improved the aggressive tools that classes have. except for Paladin, and Paladin's already like pretty high up. So I feel like Aggro Pally will survive all the changes. I feel this card is like staple in Aggro Pally, and I feel like the type of game that Aggro Pally plays in general will dictate a decent amount of the cards that people play in their decks. So I think it'll be very impactful in the meta again. And then Healing Wave. Okay, I mean Healing Wave, it's number 5 for me. Actually, like, there's not many super powerful cards in TGT. Most of the cards are just generally balanced. I feel Healing Wave is a really important card. It's a card that might not even be in many decks. The truth is, if everybody's playing mid-range and control decks and that's working out, Shamans aren't even going to play Healing Wave at all because they won't need to. But the second people start playing garbage like Face Hunter again, the people that are used to playing mid-range Shaman or control Shaman, they're suddenly going to put in double Healing Wave and absolutely mercilessly destroy all the Face Hunters. So it's kind of like the card that'll keep the super aggressive decks in check. And that's why it's so important. It's one of those cards that it doesn't maybe actively control the meta, but it does so in a preventative measure. So that's why it's a really, really powerful, really important card that was added in the Grand Tournament. As far as the top 5 worst cards, I think people don't really understand what really defines a bad card. There are cards that just seem really bad in the general sense, but over time, people have played cards that just seem really bad. Like, I talked about Demon Fuse earlier. People at the start of Hearthstone thought like Arcane Golem was a really bad card. Arcane Golem is in probably 1 in 3 decks that you end up queuing into ladder. It doesn't seem like a good card on its own, but it just fits a theme. Cards don't have to be good on their own, but there are cards that they just never see constructed play, and sometimes those cards also like never see arena play. And I think there's quite a few of those in this expansion. So number 1 on the list. It's actually not the same one as on the public list. I think it's Mogor's Champion. Mogor's Champion, I think, is literally like the biggest piece of crap I've ever seen. I mean, this card could be an 8/8. It'd still be not constructed viable, and like it'd be okay. It'd be maybe pretty good in arena at that. But like in its current stats, it's so unbelievably bad in arena. It's like 8 power, but it's a 6 drop. But because the health is so low, and you can't actually reliably attack into what you want, like it might just hit like a 1/1 or something, and then you just get tempoed out. You lose. It's mind-blowingly bad. I see absolutely no reason for there to be a card this terrible at all in the game. What does this card do? It does nothing. Absolutely nothing. If anything, it just saturates the pool of cards because it's basically one of the worst cards ever made in Hearthstone. So I guess in arena, it overall drops the quality of cards you can expect to have in your deck. That's it. That's all the card does. And then, okay, yeah, Poison Blade. Poison Blade is that bad. It's that bad. They tried to make this Inspire Rogue happen, I guess, but it needed to be way better than that. So this card is terrible. It might see some very, very, very marginal arena play, but probably in like a must-use situation where you have some really bad options against this card in the draft. And that's another thing I kind of have to think of, like, so my next card on the list is Injured Valdir, right? So I think this card is just terrible. Even if you're playing Priest, you play this on turn 1, you heal it on turn 2. You just lost your second turn to play turn 1, 2, 3, and so what, right? That's the best case scenario. For all the other classes, it's just complete trash. It's just something you're not going to be able to heal. It's a 1 mana 2/1 that does nothing, and it's not even like a Murloc, right? It's so bad. It's really mind-blowingly bad. So Nobody will ever really play this in Constructed. People might try and priest decks, but I think they will quickly realize it's not worth it. And in Arena, people will just never play this. I mean, I guess if you were a priest and you really needed 2-drops, you might play this guy, but it's still not going to work. Like, in Arena, you play against mages most of the time. If you're a good player, you get to high number of wins, you're going to play mage, and then mage, and then mage. So you're going to play this on turn 1, and they're just going to kill it before you can heal it. Okay, well that's it. That was the card, right? On a similar note, tournament attendee, I think it's also just worthless. Not strong enough for Constructed, and just not really good enough for Arena. Like, it doesn't matter that it has taunt because it only has 1 health. So most of the time it's just not going to work. It's just, it has no impact on the game at all. It saturates the existing card pool, so overall the card quality is worse in Arena. That's it. That's all it does, just like the other ones. And the 5th one, again, same thing, very unimpressive. It's the Ice Rager. Nobody will play this in Constructed. Nobody will really play this in Arena. I don't know. Sometimes you'll have to pick it. Sometimes you really need 3-drops, but it's just not good. It's just really bad. You're going to try to avoid picking this card almost at all costs, even though it's basically strictly better than Magma Rager. That part doesn't actually matter. It's just so horrible still. So, I don't know, man. Maybe a few years down the line, we'll have, like, Chaos Rager, and it's going to be like a 3-mana 5/3, and then finally we can play the Ragers. But, the time is not now. Anyway, guys, hope you guys enjoyed my recap of what's going down with the TGT. We'll see how right I will be. Probably I'll be pretty wrong. Probably it'll be some very surprising deck that'll come out and dictate the meta again. But if not, I think we got most things in check, and it's pretty interesting to figure it out ahead of time. So, hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.